I'm Keisha Harris, 42 years old, and 6 months ago, something happened at my marketing director job that changed everything. I was sitting in my office reviewing quarterly reports when my boss called me in and told me I was being terminated for not being a cultural fit. Despite 5 years of exceeded targets and 2 promotions, my heart dropped into my stomach, but what the company did next was even worse. If you've ever experienced racism in the workplace, please let me know where you're watching from and subscribe to join others who understand this struggle. Growing up in Detroit, my grandmother used to tell me, "Baby, you're gonna have to work twice as hard to get half as much, but that don't mean you stop working." She cleaned office buildings downtown for 30 years, and every morning she'd iron her uniform with the same precision she taught me to iron my school clothes. My parents, both teachers, made sure I understood that education was my ticket to something better. They saved every penny to send me to Michigan State, where I was often the only black face in my business classes. I learned early how to code switch Nietzsche's speaking one way with my family at Sunday dinners at my aunt's house over collard greens and cornbread, and another way in those sterile classrooms where professors called on me to represent the entire black experience. After college, I moved to Chicago and spent 3 years at a small agency, working 60-hour weeks while my white colleagues left at 5. I watched them get promoted while I was passed over, despite bringing in the biggest clients. But I had a mentor, Miss Patricia Johnson, a black woman who'd broken through in the 80s. She taught me to document everything, to speak up in meetings even when my voice shook, and to never let them make me small. When I landed my position at Morrison & Associates, a mid-sized marketing firm, she told me, "Now you're in the big leagues, baby. Remember who you are and where you come from." At Morrison & Associates, I built something beautiful. Within 2 years, I'd increased our social media engagement by 300% and brought in $2.3 million in new business. I developed campaigns that actually reached diverse audiences, something the company had been failing at for years. My team respected me, clients specifically requested to work with me, and I was making 6 figures for the first time in my life. I bought my mom a new car and started saving for a house. I was the marketing director, leading a team of 8, and I mentored 2 young black women who reminded me of myself at their age. Every Thursday, I volunteered at the community center where I grew up, teaching resume writing to folks trying to get back on their feet. Life was good. But there were signs I should have paid more attention to. My boss, Richard Palmer, a 55-year-old white man who'd inherited his position from his father, had a way of cutting me off in meetings. He'd ask questions about campaigns I'd already explained, as if he hadn't been listening. During client presentations, he'd repeat my ideas as if they were his own suggestions. When I wore my natural hair in a twist-out, he made comments about professional appearance. When I suggested we target black consumers for a beauty campaign, he said we needed to be careful about getting too niche. Small things that stung but that I pushed through. Because that's what we do. The day everything changed started like any other Tuesday. I arrived at 7:30 a.m., reviewed the quarterly numbers showing my department had exceeded goals by 40%, and prepared for our weekly leadership meeting. I just finished a successful campaign launch for our biggest client, and the preliminary results were phenomenal. I was wearing my favorite navy blazer, the one my mother bought me when I got promoted, and I felt confident walking into that conference room. My family didn't come from money, but we came from love and high expectations. My grandfather was a mechanic who saved enough to buy his own shop, teaching my father that ownership mattered more than just having a job. My grandmother cooked Sunday dinner for 20 people every week, making sure our extended family stayed connected. At those dinners, we talked about everything mixed politics, dreams, struggles, and how to navigate a world that didn't always welcome us. My parents met at a civil rights meeting in 1975 and raised me to understand that progress required both individual excellence and collective action. When I was 12, my father sat me down and explained that some people would judge me before I even opened my mouth, but that I should never make myself smaller to make them comfortable. "You carry the hopes of our ancestors," he said. "Honor that." In college, I learned to navigate predominantly white spaces while staying true to myself. I joined the Black Student Association and found my community, but I also forced myself to participate in business clubs where I was often the only black woman. I practiced speaking with authority, learned to interrupt when men talked over me, and developed the skill of making my presence felt without seeming threatening. My senior year, when a professor suggested I might be more comfortable in a softer major, I doubled down and graduated summa cum laude. That experience taught me that excellence was my best weapon against low expectations. Building my career meant constantly proving myself in rooms where my competence was questioned before I even spoke. At my first job, I watched white colleagues make mistakes that were forgiven while my work was scrutinized for perfection. I learned to arrive early, stay late, and document everything. I developed relationships across racial lines but kept my closest professional bonds with other Black women who understood the unique pressures we faced. Miss Patricia taught me that success wasn't just about individual achievement, it was about opening doors for others to follow. The Tuesday that changed everything, I walked into our leadership meeting carrying a presentation about our most successful quarter ever. The room was full. Richard Palmer, our CEO Mr. Morrison, the other department heads, and our new VP of Operations, a man named Brad Stevens, who'd been hired 3 months earlier despite having less experience than me. I'd applied for that position and been told I was too valuable in my current role. As I presented our numbers, I felt proud. My team had delivered exceptional results, and our client retention rate was the highest in company history. But something felt off. Richard barely looked at my presentation, and when I mentioned our success reaching urban demographics, he exchanged a look with Brad that I caught but couldn't quite interpret. When I finished, instead of congratulations, Richard said, "Keisha, we need to talk about team dynamics and cultural alignment." My stomach dropped. In 5 years, I'd never heard those words applied to my work. After the meeting, he asked me to stay behind. "Keisha," he said, closing the door, "I've been getting some feedback that your management style is becoming divisive. Some team members feel uncomfortable with your approach to diversity initiatives." I asked for specifics, and he waved his hand dismissively. "It's not about any one thing, it's about fit. About the kind of environment we're trying to maintain here." When I asked who had complained, he said it wasn't important. When I mentioned our record-breaking numbers, he said success wasn't just about numbers. "We need to think about whether this is still the right place for you," he concluded. I left that meeting knowing exactly what was happening, even though I hoped I was wrong. I'd seen this before. The vague complaints, the sudden questioning of qualifications, the moving goalposts. That evening, I called Miss Patricia and described the conversation. She was quiet for a long moment before saying, "Baby, you better start documenting everything. This sounds familiar, and it don't usually end well." That night, I started a detailed journal of every interaction, every meeting, every email. I had a feeling I was going to need evidence. 2 weeks later, Richard called me into his office again. This time, HR was present. A white woman named Jennifer who'd never spoken to me beyond polite greetings. "Keisha," Richard began, "we've decided to make some organizational changes. Your position is being eliminated, effective immediately. We'll provide 2 weeks severance and a reference letter." I sat there stunned. "Eliminated?" I asked. "Yes," Jennifer chimed in. "We're restructuring the marketing department. Your responsibilities will be distributed among existing team members." The next day, I learned that Brad Stevens had been promoted to oversee marketing in addition to his other duties, and that my salary was being used to hire 2 junior-level employees. When I asked Jennifer about the restructuring, she said it was a business decision based on evolving needs. When I pointed out that my department had just delivered record results, she said, "Sometimes change is necessary regardless of past performance." The company that had just had its most successful quarter in my department's history was apparently eliminating the position of the person who'd made it happen. The gaslighting started immediately. In my exit interview, Jennifer asked if I felt adequately supported during my time at the company. When I mentioned feeling singled out and questioned about my management style despite strong results, she said, "Sometimes feedback can feel personal when it's really about professional growth." She suggested that my perception might be affecting how I interpreted constructive guidance. When I asked about the timing of my termination immediately after our best quarter, she said, "These decisions aren't made lightly, and they're based on multiple factors that go beyond just quarterly numbers." Richard held a team meeting after my departure and told my staff that I'd decided to pursue other opportunities and that the transition would be seamless. He introduced Brad as their new supervisor and said he was excited about bringing fresh perspectives to the department. One of my mentees, Jasmine, called me that evening crying. "Miss Keisha," she said, "they're already changing everything you built, and the way they talked about you, it didn't feel right." She told me that Brad had made a comment about getting back to traditional marketing approaches and focusing on mainstream demographics. I tried filing a complaint with corporate HR, but the process was designed to protect the company, not the employee. They assigned an investigator who worked directly for the company and asked me to provide concrete evidence of discrimination. When I described the comments about cultural fit and the timing of my termination, they said they'd look into it, but needed documentation of specific discriminatory statements. They interviewed my former colleagues, who were still employed and dependent on the company for their livelihoods. Unsurprisingly, no one wanted to confirm my experiences. The investigation concluded that my termination was a legitimate business decision with no evidence of discriminatory intent. A month after my termination, I ran into a former colleague at the grocery store. She looked uncomfortable when she saw me, but eventually admitted that morale in the department had plummeted. "Brad doesn't understand your systems," she whispered, looking around nervously. "We've already lost 2 major clients, and he keeps asking us to recreate your campaigns but make them more general market friendly. He said your approach was too focused on urban consumers." She told me that Jasmine and the other young Black woman I'd mentored were both looking for new jobs because Brad had made it clear that diversity hiring wasn't his priority. The retaliation escalated when I started networking for new positions. Potential employers who called Morrison and Associates for references were apparently given lukewarm responses. One hiring manager who I'd worked with at a previous company called me directly to warn me. "Keisha, I don't know what happened over there, but Richard Palmer gave you a very strange reference. He said you were talented but not a good cultural fit and suggested that your management style was problematic for team cohesion. I know that's not who you are, but you should know what's being said." I realized they weren't just content with firing me, they were trying to damage my reputation throughout the industry. During this time, my community rallied around me in ways that reminded me why cultural connection matters so much. My church, Greater New Hope Baptist, started a prayer circle for my situation and connected me with a member who was an employment attorney. My sorority sisters from college created a group chat to share job leads and emotional support. Miss Patricia introduced me to other Black women who'd faced similar situations, and we began meeting monthly to share strategies and resources. My family reminded me daily that my worth wasn't determined by one racist company's opinion of me. But the financial pressure was real. Without my salary, I had to dip into savings to cover my mortgage and car payment. The stress was affecting my sleep and my health. Some days I questioned whether I should just take any job and move on quietly. The system seemed designed to exhaust me into giving up. But every time I considered backing down, I thought about Jasmine and the other young Black professionals still fighting to succeed in environments that questioned their every move. I couldn't let Morrison and Associates set a precedent that they could dispose of successful Black employees without consequence. 3 months after my termination, I learned something that changed everything. A friend who worked at a competing firm told me that Morrison and Associates had pitched several of my campaigns to potential clients, claiming them as Brad's original work. One campaign I developed specifically for reaching Black consumers was being presented to a major beauty brand, but all references to cultural specificity had been removed. They were literally profiting from my intellectual property while telling the industry that I wasn't a good fit for their company culture. This was the evidence I needed to prove a pattern of discriminatory behavior. With the help of my attorney, Vanessa Caldwell, a Black woman who specialized in employment discrimination, I began building a case that went beyond just wrongful termination. We documented how the company had systematically undermined my work, used my ideas without credit, and retaliated against me for challenging their practices. Vanessa helped me understand that this wasn't just about my individual situation, it was about holding companies accountable for creating hostile environments for Black professionals. The discovery process revealed even more disturbing information. Through subpoenaed emails, we found messages between Richard and Brad discussing my attitude problem and wondering if I was too aggressive for their client base. One email from Richard to Mr. Morrison said, "I think Keisha's focus on diversity marketing is making some of our traditional clients uncomfortable. We might need to reconsider her role." Another message showed Brad suggesting that my department's success was probably just luck and that they needed someone more relatable in leadership. We also discovered that I wasn't the only Black employee who'd been pushed out. Over the previous 3 years, 5 Black professionals had left the company under similar circumstances. All had been high performers, all had been told they weren't good cultural fits, and all had been replaced by white employees. The pattern was undeniable, and it painted a picture of systematic discrimination that went far beyond individual bias. The case gained attention when a local journalist, Marcus Washington from the Chicago Tribune, wrote about the pattern of discrimination at Morrison and Associates. His article detailed how companies used coded language like cultural fit to mask racial bias and highlighted the broader issue of Black professionals being pushed out of leadership roles despite strong performance. The story resonated with readers, and soon other former employees from various companies were sharing similar experiences in the comments section. Morrison and Associates initially tried to discredit the story by claiming it was based on disgruntled former employees making unfounded accusations. Richard Palmer issued a statement saying the company valued diversity and that personnel decisions were always based on legitimate business factors. But as more evidence emerged through legal discovery, their denials became harder to maintain. The case went to mediation first, where Morrison and Associates offered a small settlement with a non-disclosure agreement. Vanessa and I rejected it immediately. "They want to pay you to stay quiet so they can keep doing this to other Black professionals," she explained. "We're not just fighting for you, Morse, we're fighting for everyone who comes after you." I agreed. This wasn't about money anymore, it was about justice and accountability. When we walked into that federal courthouse for the hearing, I felt the weight of my ancestors' struggles and the hopes of future generations. And my family was there, my church members were there, and several other Black professionals who'd faced similar discrimination had come to show support. The courthouse steps looked like a community gathering, with people holding signs that read "Justice for Keisha" and "Stop Workplace Racism." Morrison and Associates' legal team tried to argue that my termination was purely a business decision based on restructuring needs and performance concerns. They claimed that my focus on diversity marketing was limiting the company's growth potential, and that my management style was incompatible with company culture. They presented carefully crafted testimony from Brad Stevens and Richard Palmer, both claiming they'd had no discriminatory intent and that race had never been a factor in their decisions. But Vanessa had prepared meticulously. She presented the emails showing discriminatory language and intent. She brought in expert testimony about coded language in workplace discrimination. She demonstrated the pattern of Black professionals being pushed out and replaced. Most powerfully, she showed how the company had continued to use my work and ideas while claiming I wasn't competent enough to remain employed. The turning point came when Vanessa played a recording I'd made of my final conversation with Richard Palmer. Illinois is a one-party consent state, and I'd started recording meetings after Miss Patricia suggested it. In the recording, Richard could be heard saying, "Keisha, you have to understand that our clients expect a certain presentation. Your way of doing things, while successful, doesn't align with the image we're trying to project." When Vanessa asked him to clarify what he meant by presentation and image, he became flustered and eventually admitted that some clients had made comments about wanting to work with more traditional account managers. The federal mediator hearing the case was Judge Maria Rodriguez, a Latina woman who'd seen plenty of discrimination cases. After 3 days of testimony, she ruled that Morrison and Associates had engaged in a pattern of racial discrimination and that my termination was clearly retaliatory. The company was ordered to pay $400,000 in damages, provide a positive reference letter acknowledging my contributions, and implement mandatory bias training for all leadership staff. They were also required to establish a diversity committee with external oversight and to report their hiring and promotion statistics annually for the next 5 years. But the victory went beyond the legal ruling. The case had attracted enough media attention that Morrison and Associates faced public scrutiny about their practices. 3 major clients terminated their contracts, citing concerns about the company's values and workplace culture. The Chicago Urban League and NAACP issued statements supporting the ruling and calling for other companies to examine their own practices. My story became part of a larger conversation about workplace discrimination and the ways companies use coded language to mask racial bias. The immediate aftermath of winning was emotionally complex. I felt vindicated but exhausted, triumphant but scarred by the process. The stress of fighting for justice while facing financial uncertainty had taken a toll on my health and relationships. But the support from my community reminded me that this victory wasn't just mine. It belonged to everyone who'd supported me and everyone who would benefit from the precedent we'd set. Within 6 months of the ruling, Morrison and Associates made significant changes to avoid further legal problems. Richard Palmer was quietly forced into early retirement, and the company hired a Black woman, Dr. Angela Thompson, as their new Director of Diversity and Inclusion. They implemented new policies for addressing discrimination complaints and began actively recruiting Black professionals for leadership positions. While these changes were motivated by legal pressure rather than genuine enlightenment, they created better opportunities for Black employees. The case also inspired other Black professionals to speak up about their experiences. I received dozens of emails from people who'd faced similar situations but hadn't known how to fight back. Several filed their own discrimination complaints, citing my case as precedent. An informal network developed of Black professionals supporting each other through these challenges, sharing resources and strategies for both career advancement and legal protection. My personal growth through this process was profound. Fighting the case forced me to fully own my worth and capabilities in ways I'd been taught to downplay. I learned that demanding justice wasn't about being angry or vengeful, it was about insisting that systems treat people with dignity and respect. The experience also deepened my commitment to mentoring other Black professionals and advocating for systemic change in corporate America. I eventually founded my own marketing consultancy, focusing specifically on helping companies develop authentic strategies for reaching diverse audiences. Many of my clients are businesses that genuinely want to do better after witnessing discrimination cases like mine. I've been able to hire several talented Black marketers who'd been overlooked by traditional agencies, creating the kind of inclusive environment I'd always wanted to work in. The ongoing vigilance required to maintain progress became clear as I watched Morrison and Associates over the following years. While they made initial changes to comply with the court order, some old patterns began creeping back after the legal pressure subsided. Dr. Thompson left after 2 years, citing lack of support for her initiatives. The company's diversity statistics improved slightly but plateaued well below industry benchmarks. It became evident that real change requires constant monitoring and pressure, not just one-time interventions. Through speaking engagements and workshops, I've been able to share lessons from my experience with other Black professionals facing similar challenges. The key insights I always emphasize are: document everything from day one, build relationships with other Black professionals who can provide support and witness accounts, understand your legal rights and don't be afraid to consult with attorneys early, and remember that fighting discrimination isn't just about individual justice mass, it's about creating better conditions for everyone who comes after you. For those watching who might be facing discrimination right now, I want you to know that your experiences are valid. Your worth is not determined by how others treat you, and there are resources and communities ready to support you. Connect with local civil rights organizations, document every incident in writing with dates and witnesses, and don't let anyone convince you that discrimination is just part of the game. We deserve better, and we have the power to demand it. The path to racial justice in the workplace isn't easy, but every person who speaks up makes it a little safer for the next person to do the same. My grandmother used to say that our ancestors didn't survive slavery and segregation so we could accept crumbs from tables we helped build. We belong in every room, at every table, and in every leadership position where our talents can contribute. Never let anyone make you forget that. This fight continues every day in every workplace where Black professionals are told to make themselves smaller, speak differently, or accept less than they deserve. But we're not fighting alone. We have each other, we have our history of resilience, and we have the legal tools to demand justice. The change might be slow, but it's happening because people like us refuse to accept discrimination as inevitable. If my story resonates with you, please subscribe and share it with others who need to hear it. Let's build a community of Black professionals who support each other's success and hold institutions accountable for creating equitable workplaces. Together, we can ensure that the next generation faces fewer barriers and more opportunities than we did. The struggle continues, but so does our strength.